So, having outlined those 2 points, spread the word and help meet their basic needs, I've now got to the point where I'm going to stop and say if there's anything you want to ask about or anything you want to say about what you feel we can do to help, I'm here. I'm open for any discussion and any question. And I just want to say very personally, you have no idea what it means to me that you're here. I don't know if anybody else gave me a lecture thank people like this, but you know, you can't. None of us can handle this stuff on our own. You have to do it with other people. So it means a huge amount to me to be able to share this and feel that it's tough for both of us.
Hi, first of all, I would like to thank you for this wonderful presentation. And thank you for giving us your time to actually show us what's actually going on there. My question is about, if you don't mind, your religion. I know Dr. Doris Gray said that you were born and you were raised as a Buddhist. And so when you went there, this is all going on in this country, and people are blaming Buddhists for it. And as we heard the woman saying that monks killed her husband. So did you talk openly to people there and explain that you were a Buddhist, or did you have to hide it?
Actually, I was terrified of going. And I was terrified of going not because I thought I'd get beaten up by these people, you know, but I didn't know whether I'd be able to handle it. You can see I'm not doing too well today. And I knew there was something that perhaps in a way I can't say uniquely placed and able to do, but certainly could try doing. Probably if I had been born in Asia or was a conventional Buddhist monk, I don't know how well that would have gone down in the camps, you know. But I'm an old white man, you know. So when we were having these very intimate meetings with these people, I knew what I had to do, and I would let all my other very distinguished colleagues, you know, former ambassadors and people, ask all the detailed questions, you know. And then I'd say, to them, I'm a Buddhist. And I would like you to know that not only I, but Buddhists all over the world are horrified by what has been done to you. And filled with deep sorrow. With what you are going through now. And I managed to look in the groups that we were with, each person in the eye. And then afterwards I would go up and because many of them are from the Muslim tradition, I would say Assalamu alaikum to each of them. And even at a certain point, I became rather like a badly behaved member of our delegation because I felt, you know, I need to spend time with these people, and I would be outside, you know, in the dirt with these old men and naked children and people and women, just shaking their hands, and it was a very, very potent moment for me because everybody was silent. It was some kind of I don't know, reaching out to each other across some immense sort of boundaries and human suffering. And that's probably one of the best things I ever did in my life. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that I bet all of you know what I'm talking about, because this is happening in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of communities, in all kinds of religions, all over the world at this moment. This is a very, very powerful local story. But there is a catastrophic phenomenon going across the world at the moment, dividing people up and having people subjected to the most appalling suffering just because they happen to be either another race or another faith or speak a different language. Now, we are not going to get forward as humanity on that basis. So it was a tough question, but thank you. Yes, hello.
Hi, I just want to thank you. Actually, I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for allowing yourself to be emotional, and you have no idea how powerful and touching and relatable your feeling as a Buddhist and your sorrow for those people, whether Muslims, Christians, or non-religious, is extremely touching, and I really, really, really appreciate your talk and your values as a human being, regardless of any other religion, and I really hope we can do something. And just thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this.
In your opinion, how do you think we solve the statelessness that the Rohingya are going to be facing due to their not being recognized by Myanmar and now as a sort of refugee and in a transitional state?
Right. Well, I think it's. I'm sad to say this, but first of all, I think none of this is going to be solved quickly. I believe that I was told today that the Myanmar government had announced they had taken back one family. I personally do not think that you destroy people's villages and then send in the bulldozers with the intention that those people are coming back. When we asked the refugees about this, which maybe is the most important point, they basically came down to 3 points. The first was that their safety has to be guaranteed. So it's not that they speak with one unified voice, but they support a proposal from the Bangladesh government, which it has made to the General Assembly of the United Nations, that actually there be safe zones created within Myanmar, which would be subject to UN protection. That would require the government and the military of Myanmar to allow international military supervision of parts of their territory in order to enable people that they have just driven out to come back and live there. Okay. The second consideration is that they want their citizenship back. Well, if you follow this whole issue very, very closely, there has been a progressive and systematic deprival of their citizenship, like family by family, military and other people coming to the families, getting them to sign documents that say which effectively renounce their identity as members of the community. This would require a complete change in successive government policy in Myanmar stretching back over decades. And these people, I think you can understand why, say, well, they wouldn't feel safe and they perhaps wouldn't want to be citizens of the country unless there was justice for the forces and the people who committed these atrocities. Now, you saw the results of the Myanmar military's own investigation in which they said that none of this had happened. So this opens up the question of what is called universal jurisdiction. That brings us to the question of genocide. It brings us to the question of the International Criminal Court. It brings us to the question of the security, with at least one permanent member of the Security Council likely to use its veto in support of Myanmar against any action. And so although it is technically possible, and I know that the evidence is being collected for this, there could be a special international court established for the trying of war crimes against the military and possibly civilian leadership of Myanmar. You may have noticed those take years. And it's not because they're ineffective, it's because it's actually about establishing who was responsible, what they did, holding to a high standard of evidence, and then passing justice. If you take all those three things together, and then you ask, what can we do? Well, I would say at this point that the only thing that's going to shift that dynamic is actually by an awful lot of people around the world refusing to let these people be forgotten. Because it is going to require such a level of sort of like it doesn't have to be political agitation, but it's human agitation about this, that it becomes politically impossible for governments to fall silent on this matter. And I realize I'm asking for a lot there. But you know, I want to tell you something that might seem really, really strange to you, and it might seem incredibly egotistical on my part to say this. There is a film about the monk in Myanmar who probably has the most to do with stirring all this up. And I watched that film and I thought, if one guy can do that, watch what this guy can do. You know, and I know, I hope it doesn't sound like a cartoon to you, but it's like, well, wait a minute. This catastrophe originated in the mind of a small number of people. All the other catastrophes, I don't have to mention them here, they began in the minds of a basically small number of people who started convincing other people to do the most unspeakable things to others. So, whatever there's 200 of here, that's probably more than these other people started off with. So, if we turn our minds to creating change, it's possible. And like you said, I worked all my life in Amnesty International, and people thought it was a joke when it was created. It was not a joke. Oh, there you go.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that there is a big question mark on the global responsibility regarding Rohingya's issue with this grave injustice, persecution, and ethnic cleansing. Because after what happened in Sudan, Syria, Rwanda, and a lot of countries, and I would like to go back to your question of what we can do. I think what we can do, we should reconsider the definition of national self-determination, because the sovereignty tool allows those people to commit crimes, ethnic cleansing, in the name of state. So I think this is the big problem facing this Rohingya issue, is the self-determination. Thank you.
I was speaking to someone just the other day, and they said that, really there was a, if you can't quite cast your mind back to the end of the Second World War, I realize that. But take it from me, and I can't quite either, believe it or not. But, the horrors of that war were so immense that it delivered a certain shock to governments and people, which is like we've got to get out of a situation which essentially was rooted in what you're describing, about nation states and all that sort of thing. And I think it's fair to say that there was a period where, there were institutions were put in place to attempt to prevent this kind of thing, and there was some kind of spirit. Some people question this, but I think there was some kind of spirit of working together, coexistence, and that kind of thing, even though there was an awful lot of tension in that period. But it seems that is breaking down, even that sort of veneer of peace, if you call it that. And interestingly enough, in the structure of the United Nations, these large powers that were supposed to protect peace in the world are actually at the moment the powers that are gearing up against each other. So this also opens the door to a tremendous amount of instability, and definitely there are people who say, well, look, what's the root problem here? It's people identifying with a subset of humanity, whether it's their race, their nation, or whatever, rather than taking a view of being part of the whole of humanity. And if you take that thought further, you start to look at the environmental crisis, and as a species, we've tended to put our species first. And countless other species, as you know, are being destroyed. And we've been brought to the brink of the devastation of our home in space. So I think, that in addition to thinking, like you were saying about national determination and how individual peoples are protected, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for individual peoples like the Rohingya to feel safe and protected without actually some kind of, whether it's going to take shock therapy or what, the world waking up as a whole to saying, look, we have to put some kind of system and values in place that are going to transcend all our ancient divisions so that we can help all of us and have solidarity. Goes back to your question, how do we get solidarity for these people? If people don't care about them and don't see them as important to them as their own families, these people are going to be left in this camp. So I don't know whether that's addressing your question, but it's definitely what is brought up in my mind, and why also in a way I'm happy to share this with you, because I feel, yes, this is about the Rohingya, but it's a terrible and damning example of what seems to be going so disastrously wrong in this world and the way we look at our common humanity. At least that's a personal take,
Thank you for the speech. My question is this. You somewhat stated skeptically that this could be a conspiracy theory and whatnot, but Saudi Arabia, China, and United Arab Emirates has created multiple pipelines and oil extracting pipelines within these recent bulldozed areas. So my question to you is, do you think it's plausible that if Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, China, and all other countries involved were removed, that this could lessen the issue at hand?
Just check. Removed in what way?
To end their oil extraction pipeline.
You're speaking on behalf of quite a body of research and political thinking, which believes that this issue lies at the heart of what's going on here. let me just say that it doesn't quite explain the incredibly long period of time prior to the current interest in the natural gas and oil deposits, during which the Rohingya people have been subjected to this apartheid, which did not lead to, clearing the areas for oil exploration or whatever. It seemed to be purely punitive measures against a relatively small part of the population. Nonetheless, I would say that every political observer and people who follow bodies like the Security Council at the United Nations know that there is at least one permanent member of the Security Council which at this moment will block any moves by the Security Council to deal with the issue in this country. And that country is China. The capital of the province where the Rohingya live is called Sittwe. And on the Chinese plan for the One Belt, One Road initiative, Sittwe is marked, and with the agreement of the Myanmar government, to be the Chinese port on the Bay of Bengal through which this trade, shipping, and oil and natural gas exploration flows. So I want to say to you, we absolutely cannot rule that out as a factor. There's no question about that. But I just wanted to point out it. Sometimes people pick one part of the puzzle and say it explains the whole. And in what I've been looking at, it's part of the complexity of the puzzle, not the explanation of the whole of it. But what you're pointing to also is that in a number of these situations, and we could think of a whole bunch of them in the world today, it's not sufficient just to see it in isolation as a problem within that country. There are other geographical interests and financial interests involved in virtually all of these. So that is very helpful insight. Does that go to your question?
Hey.
Yes.
So before anything, I would love to thank you. You have no idea how your presence today is important to us. You are defending people from another ethnicity. And thank you very much, because you are our glimmer of hope that we can coexist one day. So my question is, why the media is not talking enough about this problem? Why we don't see Rohingyas, Myanmar in this problem? Why there is no media talking and voicing the problems of those people?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm conscious that I'm standing in front of a person who spent their life working as a working journalist and a very distinguished international journalist. So I'm going to be open to correction on what I say here. In my extremely long lifetime, I would say I've noticed two shifts in some styles of news reporting. First of all, in what could be called the old days, there were often journalists who were sent on assignment to a country for a very long period of time, became very, very familiar with the situation in the country, and there was time allocated, say in the broadcast media and particularly in print media, for longer, more in-depth analytical pieces about trends and situations in the country. So this would be a classic one where someone would say, what has happened over the last 6 months, what is going over, what's going on, what is the prognosis? I would say, generally speaking, in my observation of the media I look at, there is less and less space allocated for that in comparison to what I'm familiar with from the old times. And part of the evidence of that is that the number of what were then called foreign correspondents who were embedded in countries has, perhaps for financial or other reason, been significantly cut back. So often you have people who are flown in to cover an event and fly out afterwards. Now, that reinforces the second aspect, which is not necessarily the fault of the news media, but I think it has to do with what we are now calling the attention economy. And probably you know that this phrase has to do also with the effect of new technology on all of us, which is that we seem to be becoming increasingly less capable of sticking with something for more than very, very short periods of time. Like, I'm very appreciative you're all still here. I was thinking, this could be far too long, that sort of thing, right? And it means that in a way, the meaning of news has become even more time precise, which is like what's happening right now. So like, you're very interested in what, and I'm so pleased to hear, but I'm telling you what I saw 2 weeks ago. And there aren't very many news reports about what was going on 2 weeks ago. To put together that little film at the beginning, I was basically going back to journalistic pictures when the whole thing was breaking news. It was something that was taking the world by surprise. It had that riveting power of now. I think it'd be reasonable to say that in most editorial boards, if someone said, I'd like to go and cover the Rohingya, that the answer would be, well, what's changed? And if nothing has changed, then there's nothing by definition new. So the problem we have here, and I want to say that I met senior officials of the Bangladesh government. How does that relate to this whole thing? They know that what is impolitely called the media circus has moved off. Just as you said, it's not news. So then where is the public pressure or the interest in this that is going to motivate governments to pledge the huge sums of money that are needed to sustain these people? And the Bangladesh government has been saying their greatest fear is that although they were told when the media was there that money would be no object, that when they go to the next huge conference where governments pledge funds to see if they can get to that billion, most elected representatives and government officials will feel under no pressure from their home constituencies or media to fulfill that promise of money being no object. And, if you've noticed this pattern, we see it is not just about these situations. It can be about earthquakes, it can be about natural disasters. Everybody gets incredibly excited, which is good. But 2 or 3 days later, once the last little babies have been pulled out alive from the rubble itself is no longer interesting. The homeless people are no longer interesting. And then you have places all over the world which are just left as they were. And this is why the Rohingya and why that journalist came to me and gave me her pictures. Take these pictures out and show them. Because it's by people caring about this and knowing about this, it's the way we have to be the media now. And we have to use social media, I guess, for that. And luckily we've got it. So please use it. Does that help to answer your question? Was that a travesty of the history of journalism over the last few decades? Do you want to say anything about, add to it, improve on it?
I mean, part of it is, of course, that journalism is a business. And you need to sell your stories. And only certain types of stories sell. I remember when the famine happened in Somalia, my news agency wrote 258 stories before it was picked up the first time by newspapers. 258. Because at that time, only hundreds of people were dying. And they were saying, we'll write about it when you have 1 million people dying. Before that, it isn't news. So you can't just blame the journalists. It's a media. Media is a business. It's an industry. You have to sell your stories, and they depend on what consumers want. And consumers don't want a small tragedy. They want a gigantic tragedy before they're moved to do anything. So one human life is not worth it. It has to be 10,000 before we want to talk about it. And that is a problem.
I was hoping you could talk more about Aung San Suu Kyi a little bit.
Yes.
I know she's a former Nobel Prize winner.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about how her government has, allowed this to happen, or what exactly caused this reversal.
Well, in all humility, I have to say, I really don't know. There are multiple conflicting accounts. People tell you authoritatively This is what Aung San Suu Kyi thinks. This is what she said. This is how she got there. This statement, I don't know. I want to just tell you about a little exchange. I'm not trying to avoid this. That is the real answer. But it has some resonance which is more than just not knowing. When, with one of the groups that we were meeting, I explained, as I explained to you about, being a Buddhist and that sort of thing. And I said, I have a question for you, I said to them. What do you think went through the minds of the people who decided to do this to you and did it to you? And it was a lovely old imam who was right in front of me. And he looked at me and he said, we have lived in peace with these people for generations. We have no idea what got into their minds. And I think that there's an element of you could say like profound mystery in these sorts of situations. Because there was a level of frenzy here. The rate at which these villages were being destroyed, babies being thrown into the flames. It reminded me of the genocide in Rwanda, where the rate of killing was so intense that it was deemed mathematically impossible for human beings to wield machetes at that speed. And maybe I'd leave you with a thing for you to ponder, which I ponder a lot, which is not just what can we do, what can I do? And the I do question here is, if I was a soldier in that army, and I was ordered to do this, and all my comrades were like my blood brothers in the army, and I had had it drilled into me that these people were not even human beings. They were cockroaches who were destroying my country. When the order came to kill, how clear would my own mind be about my deepest values? That I would adhere to that rather than give them up, as countless people have done throughout history, when the hysteria of that bloodlust takes hold in a group. And strangely enough, I believe that part of the mission of this university is to help you become the sort of people who in that situation would refuse to follow orders. To me, that's the sign of a really great education. And I think the fact that you're here and interested in sitting through really this dreadful information is evidence that you know what I mean when I say that. So there's a real personal element of learning here, which is when that madness sweeps over a country or a population, will we be the people who go, it doesn't matter what you do to me, I'm not doing that? And I think that's a question that you know, I have in my mind about Aung San Suu Kyi. But as the old Imam said to me, I don't know what got into their heads. It's very important not to get dispirited by this. That's very, very important. I wondered if someone would get up and say, has this caused you to lose faith in humanity? And actually it has not. Because when you see how these people, the Rohingya people, carry their own people, care for their own people, through this incredible adversity that has befallen them. Actually, it's incredibly humbling. And then when you see all these people who have flown in from all over the world without being asked, you know, they may be large international organizations, but they're ultimately made up of people. And they've given up whatever they had, and they're living there, and they're working in these camps. The smell in these camps is horrible. And they're going in there day after day after day, helping these people who have nothing. And when you see people like that lady, Yang Hee Lee, you know, she's amazing. You know, she's like a force of nature, going in there, facing up to the generals, facing up to the hostility, facing demonstrations in the streets, doing her job and speaking out. Well, then, you know, and maybe at the end I'll show you one or two pictures just of some of the Rohingya women. The strength in their faces as they help their families. Maybe I just want to show you this, how they carry their people. You might say, well, that's what human beings do. That's right. That is what human beings do. And they're doing that, right? And look at that. And you have to realize, they might have been going for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 12 days for people. And look at this amazing woman with her baby and her children. And you see the intensity in her face. And you see her determination to care for her people. It doesn't make me lose faith in humanity. So that's perhaps a long answer to your question, but that's what's in my heart.